Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on Indian sociological tradition, in today's lecture I am going to talk about the contribution of I.P. Desai to sociology of India. I.P. Desai was a second generation sociologist who has contributed immensely to the growth and development of sociology of India. In his 40 years of teaching and research experience, he has written extensively on caste, backwardness, untouchability, family, on social movement. So, we will be briefly looking into some of the areas that he has kind of not only given his own understanding, but also provided a critical assessment of the existing theories. So, we can kind of understand the amount of contribution that he has done to different areas of sociology by adopting modern research techniques. Modern research technique, he was kind of ahead of his time. He was doing research or not by kind of referring to any theory or any kind of a book, but was doing research in terms of his own methods, and which could be kind of considered as more modern. He developed his insight related to sociology of education, family, caste, untouchability, reservation, migration and social change. When we look into these areas of research, we see that each one of them are pertinent, and much of the conventional sociology of India were around these areas. So, he is kind of doing a very great work in terms of revisiting this age or much of the theorization that has been done by Western sociologists and arriving at a more indigenous explanation of social reality. So, if can we look into it, therefore, can be kind of understand that he was giving us original treatment of the subject. He was not relying on the Western assumptions that was already existing. He was not beginning with the kind of understanding of family, caste which was already there, but he begins from the base and kind of gives us an original understanding of social reality. So, here we will be first looking in sociology of caste, untouchability and reservation. Now, caste, untouchability and reservations are very important issues when we have to understand society in India, not only today, but also in the past, because caste in the 1930-40 was defined as the most kind of important institution that regulated the social and religious life, and also there was a kind of a nexus between caste and politics, which also I.P. Desai kind of throws light on. So, each of these was very significant. Why? Because one was the debate about whether caste as an institution was disappearing with industrialization and modernization, and with the kind of India in the post-independent era with the abolition of untouchability, how was kind of treatment given to the members of lower caste. And then very important crucial debate was around the issue of reservation, that can caste as a criteria or as an identity helps to understand backwardness, and should caste become a criteria for reservation. So, these are some of the debates that he kind of looks into it, and when we look into the understanding of caste, he begins first writing on caste was titled A Note on Change in the Caste System. So, this was the important debate at that time, and much of the Western, again coming to the Western theorization, was adopting an evolutionary understanding of social change in India, where the argument which was being given was that because of industrialization, modernization, the caste would get transformed into class. But this was a argument which was kind of rejected, and was argued that caste continued to kind of retain significance in the social structuring of the society. The first work looking into the caste system was a co-authored by Y.B. Damle and published in Ghure Felicitation volume edited by K.M. Kapadia. And in this paper, I.P. Desai is looking into the changes that has happened in the institution of caste. whether the caste kind of continues as a religious, as a functionary and a hereditary division of society, or it has kind of undergone any change. So, he examined this question of transformation or change of caste on the basis of Ghurye's description of caste system given in 1932 and 1955. So, if we go back to Ghurye's description, Ghurye kind of identifies caste as a segmental division, as a hereditary group, as a group based on ascriptive status and other criteria, which is segmentary divisions, commensality, co-residence and so on, occupational division. I.P. Desai rejected the concept of caste as described by much of the existing scholars and did not consider caste as unique or intrinsic or persistence phenomena in Indian society. Caste-like division, caste-like segmentation of society was prevalent in other parts as well. What was missing was research, was the documentation on these segmentation. So, it was not so unique only to India. Though he was critical of Ghurye's features of caste system, valuation of caste system, at one point he agreed with Ghurye that caste system was not changing fast and the changes were gradual. Whatever changes in terms of behavior pattern, in terms of the mobility, in terms of group identity was changing, was not kind of very rapid or revolutionary, it was taking place gradually. And in that gradual transformation, some of the features were retained and some were kind of changing. I.P. Desai raised two questions. One, how far these features had really disappeared. The features of all these hierarchy, occupational division, segmentation. So, these features are they still valid in terms of giving an understanding of caste, or they have disappeared? That was the first question. The second question was, what was its effects on caste system as a whole? So, do we understand caste system only with reference to the features which has been given, and will it be kind of help us to understand the functioning of caste system, or they would it require kind of a relation with the political system, with the economic system, with the religious system and so on and so forth. Desai further pointed out that even intercaste marriages, urbanization and education had failed to change the caste system. When you look into these factors, these were some of the factors given as explanation that the caste system has changed. So, many people would, scholars gave the reference that since there was intercaste marriages happening, the understanding was that caste was disappearing, or because urban people were moving from rural areas to urban areas and caste was only significant in rural area, was again another kind of an assumption. And education, since education would take people to more occupation where there was no kind of criteria on the basis of caste, they would have changed. But then even in a lot of research, it shows that even in contemporary India, with education, with kind of moving towards higher education, the caste valuation continues to affect the society. So, I.P. Desai was critical of Ghurye's study of caste system in India, and he was of opinion that Ghurye's writing showed deep insight into the problem of caste, but they were not based on any fieldwork or statistical data. Ghurye had used endological approach, endological in the terms of relying on the existing literature. Ghurye's work was not based on any kind of an empirical study, and that's the problematic which Desai is pointing out. And Ghurye described the changes in caste system from the 19th century to 1915 in a historical perspective, without conducting any empirical study. So, since there was a lot of understanding of social change taking place and caste as an institution being affected by the these changes which is taking place. In order to understand whether caste system was same or has changed, it was very important to do an empirical study, because much of the literature would only reflect on the past and not say anything about the present. So that is kind of a limitation in Ghore's work. His second, L.P. Desai's second writing on caste was his paper on caste and politics, published in 1967. Now, 50s post-independent India, with the kind of nation building and Congress kind of taking the lead, this becomes very important in terms of understanding that was caste just religious or a social structure, or was it affecting the political relation or the political structure of society. And therefore, he looks into the relation between caste and politics and understands that there is a kind of a nexus. Caste influences the way in which politics is practiced in Indian context. So this was again a very important way of theorizing caste system in India. His third writing on caste was his last publication in sociology, which he co-authored with A.M. Shah and was published in 1988 after his death. In this work, he was kind of looking into the idea whether caste system was kind of criteria or was determinant of backwardness. That is, could on the basis of caste would one understand backwardness in India, or was there something else that need to be kind of taken into account to understand what backwardness meant in India. The second area which he works along with caste was on reservation, on political reservation, which is with the constitution guaranteeing based on protective discrimination, guaranteeing reservation to the large section of society. It became an important area of discourse, and I.P. Desai was kind of opinion that non-caste basis of reservation was the path for progress. So he was against caste-based reservation, and for him it meant a caste-based reservation meant that the state itself is legitimizing caste system by its own action, which it vows to annihilate. So on one side, according to I.P. Desai, the constitution was kind of abolishing untouchability, and therefore in order to ensure that there was no difference between one group and the other, it was very important that there was no recognition to caste based identity. By kind of guaranteeing reservation on the basis of caste, the identity consciousness increased, and that kind of strengthened caste relation. So rather than caste system vanishing or the state being able to annihilate caste, it was able to re-strengthen caste identity. So though there is a lot of change around post-independent India in the way in which caste kind of functions, and there are scholars who looking into contemporary India would argue that caste becomes more in the realm of private affairs. So it becomes significant when there is a marriage negotiation, and even today we know that if there is a lot of violence, there is a lot of honor killing on intercaste marriages. So private affair, it is kind of considered more conscious, whereas in the public realm, say in the occupation, job, education, it one cannot argue that caste is not existing, but yes, it is kind of a little hidden in terms of the way in which it functions. But to understand that the policy of the government was to annihilate caste, according to I.P. Desai, has not been very successful. So many of the OBCs, that is the other backward castes, have gained prominence because of the reservation, protective reservation, and also because of the policy of Green Revolution and other economic changes. But then the division, whether it be a caste based division or a class based division, has further fragmented even the OBCs and the SCs, STs. So reservation, rather than kind of creating an egalitarian society, has kind of fragmented or segmented the society further. So, as a member of the second backward class commission in Gujarat, the commission was known as Rani Commission, and IP Desai was the member of this commission. He sparked off a debate by questioning caste as the basis of reservation. So, rather he was kind of negating the idea that progress and development would be based on caste based reservation. So, that is why, what kind of made him write an work which is titled "Should Caste Be the Basis of Recognition of Backwardness?" And Desai firmly believed that caste should not be the basis for judging social and educational backwardness, and that is that backwardness could not be understood only by looking into the caste factor. It could be an economic factor, it could be a social factor, it could be religious factor. So, there could be several other factors of backwardness and not necessarily only caste system. So, occupation and income were the right parameters. So, to judge social and educational backwardness. So, it could be a member from an upper caste, but has not been able to get access to proper education, as a result is not able to get into the right occupation, and his income kind of remains low, his or her income is low. So, the individual as well as the community, it could be at the level of individual as well as the level of community, kind of remains backward. And in India there could be many groups, many community, though it across the caste, it could be upper caste from the middle level or from the lower caste, who could be subject to backwardness, and therefore according to IP Desai, caste should not be a criteria for understanding backwardness. IP Desai believed that caste-based protection would mean protection to caste system. So, as we have already discussed, that if the caste had to be annihilated or if caste had to be done away, egalitarian society had to be established, then caste-based production would also have to be go, because the moment you give recognition to a group on the basis of caste, it implies segmentation, or it could also lead to kind of a division between two groups. That is why IP Desai calls reservation as a zero-sum game. Why a zero-sum game? Because some gain, some lose. So, that is a zero-sum, that the end result would be a zero. Some are on the advantage side, some are on the disadvantage side. So, on anti-reservation rights in Gujarat, he observed that the higher caste felt that if lower communities made advancement in education and occupation, it would lower the position of higher caste socially and politically. So, IP Desai is making this observation in the 1960s, 70s, and today when we look into a lot of discourse and on reservation, there are many who are kind of saying that if you continue giving protection to a certain group on the ladder, if we look into the hierarchy, one group which is at the low being pushed will come on the top. Ultimately, what would it lead? It would lead to the top coming to the maybe at the middle or maybe at the lower level. So, this argument of IP Desai kind of stands valid when we try to understand the fragmentation or segmentation within OBC or within the minorities and within the SC/ST groups, because of the result of reservation which has been a part of Indian society. So, if we were to kind of look into reservation, it is important to resist the idea of caste as a criteria for giving a job or certain benefit, and what could be kind of more relevant according to IP Desai would be merit. So, it could be kind of giving benefit to people who have merit. So, this kind of an understanding, there is a kind of no one argument or one way out of this. There are certain valid argument or discourse on suggesting that protection or reservation is essential for a society like India, but then it kind of has its own negative repercussion when we look into a long term outcomes. The third area that he looks into is untouchability. So we know that untouchability was part of Indian society, and it was closely tied to caste system. That is, people who were from the lower caste were kind of considered as untouchable. The Brahmin community, for the ideology of the Brahmin community was that if they came in touch with the members of the lower caste, their purity would kind of reduce or disappear, and therefore there was a kind of a distance maintained between the upper caste and the lower caste. So the upper caste would stay in the center of the village, and the lower caste would be staying on the periphery. There was no kind of physical contact between the two. Desai studied untouchability, the practice of untouchability in rural Gujarat, and he was of opinion that there was no visibility, or there was no evidence of untouchability getting disappeared. So he was kind of saying that though you have this untouchability as illegal, constitutionally declared as not to be practiced, but then in the mindset people kind of continued doing it. So that is caste system is to be understood more at an ideological level, where certain inherent ideas about society still functions irrespective of the constitutional provision that has been guaranteed. I.P. Desai was suspicious that untouchability would continue in one or the other spheres of life, and what again I.P. Desai is not incorrect, because many a time we read reports in newspaper and otherwise that in many parts of India the child or the student of a lower caste was supposed to sit on the ground, and the child of students of upper Brahmin community was sitting on the table. So several reports even today kind of tells us that there is some amount of ideological existence of untouchability. So in order to kind of eradicate an untouchability, what is required is proper monitoring and implementation of the law by the government as well as by the members of the untouchables themselves. So it can economic development could be taken, as I.P. Desai suggests, as one of the way in which positive changes can be introduced in rural areas, because once there is economic growth and development, then this whole idea of lower caste being dependent on the upper caste would kind of disappear, and once they are economically independent, then the notion of untouchability would also vanish. That is how I.P. Desai looks into the issue of untouchability. So besides looking into caste, reservation, untouchability, the other area which he has kind of significantly contributed, rather he is one of the first sociologists to give a sociological analysis, is the area of education. So education in those days when I.P. Desai was researching and studying was concerned mainly with philosophy of education, the psychology of education, administration of education, and the problems of teachers training. So these were some of the areas that were being studied. I.P. Desai was the first Indian scholar to study education as a social problem and undertook an empirical study of high school students in the city of Pune. He was the first kind of this is one of his first academic work that he was doing. He was looking doing an empirical research of high school students, and the findings of his research was published in the field of sociology of education in a book titled High School Students in Pune, and it was published in 1953 by Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute. His second publication on education was the paper on sociology of education, published in 1967, and the field studies of sociology of education in 1970. Suma Chitnis, an important academician in the field of sociology of education, kind of acknowledges the contribution that I.P. Desai has made, and according to Suma Chitnis, I.P. Desai was one of the first to do an empirical study of education in India. He was the kind of the first sociologist to give us a sociological understanding of high school, and that is kind of, he can be kind of considered as the founding figure of sociology of education. And his empirical study of high school in Pune, he was interested in studying two things. One was to look into sociology of education, or rather look into system of education as a system of stratification. So once individual kind of acquire education, they are able to get good jobs, the income improves, so they move up. So and those who are denied would kind of continue to be at the lower ladder of the hierarchy. So he was looking into the relation between stratification and education. The second was to look into the role of education for social mobility. So could only by acquiring education was it possible for the entire group to move up the ladder or be socially mobile, or it was only for the individual who had attained education that his or her income would improve, and therefore the kind of was it an individual mobility or social mobility. In this study, he finds some influences of the structural functional analysis. So the structural functional analysis, the influence that comes on him was because he was working along with M.N. Srinivas in Baroda. So he will be looking in how the education kind of functions to structures the society. Any social system consists of part, and the educational system is one. That is a part of the functional analysis, that each part contributes to the maintenance of whole. Educational system as a part of the entire system also functions to maintain the integrity of the and that is where he will look into social mobility. The fourth area of his research was on family in India. As I've already stated, in that family in India kind of tells us how the method that IP Desai takes on is in terms of very unique in terms of giving us an inductive approach, and he looks into the changes of the joint family in India. So the joint families have a kind of the argument that joint family has changed to nuclear family was modified by IP Desai, and he sees family as having a dynamic range of relationship, not just a prototype of a large number of nuclear families staying together. So he was kind of looking into the concept of jointness very critically, and jointness, which was defined in terms of residence, common kitchen, ritual gathering, was critically analyzed. And he was also looking into the industrialization, which was an external force bringing about change in the change. So change in the institution of family was taking place internally because of families migrating or kind of talking about the jointness was also taking because of urbanization and industrialization. IP Desai defines family as a relative staying together and sharing a range of relationship, right from sharing, care, competition and even conflict. Now this is again very important, where family was looked at only from a functional perspective as performing function. IP Desai brings in the conflict perspective for understanding family. He defined kind of differentiates between joint family and nuclear family, and he says that the distinction is based on the behavioral pattern and role taken up by the members. So the jointness of a family can be studied using religious rituals like Shraddh, marriage, sanctions during birth and death, because this is a time where those who are member of the family would assemble, would be together. So therefore he is kind of understanding jointness with reference to certain rituals, to certain religious occasions. The other contribution is where he is kind of will tell us that family and household are distinct. Now 90s, 30s and 40s study on families, family and household was considered as synonymous. IP Desai would kind of differentiate between the two. Even though the family system in India was changing, but the jointness persisted even without owning a joint property or joint residence. So, one could be staying in India, the brother could be staying in US, yet they are joint. So, joint was not necessarily traditional. Joint was not necessarily staying in one house in the rural part. Jointness would come from many other aspect rather than just common residence or kind of. So, there was another point on which jointness would be defined was in terms of propertyness, property holding group. Family was defined as a property holding group. Now, even though members do not have a common stake in property, the jointness can still be retained. So, I.P. Desai has kind of done the study of family by trying to identify what jointness would mean, how the understanding of jointness will help us to understand the changes that is taking place in the institution, how we conceptualize the movement of family from a joint family to a nuclear family. And when we try to understand the nature of social change or change taking place in family, it is important to understand how urbanization influences this jointness. So, residential separation did not mean joint families were reducing in number. There could be number of residential because of occupation, people staying in different parts of the country, but the jointness does not kind of reduce. The next area of research was sociology of migration. The study of migration in Parujan was pioneering study in the field of sociology of migration, and this migration was a research where I.P. Desai expresses his rootedness to the rural India, and he kind of documents the changes that has taken place in rural area due to the urbanization, the green revolution and so on. And the study of migration, he is doing a lot of data collection, case history analysis, group interviews in order to arrive at a theory, sociological understanding of migration. And much of the migration was in terms of understanding the pull and push factor, and there was a neglect of the ideas of opportunities which was available in the village. I.P. Desai looks into migration with reference to the validity of opportunities which was doing in it. So, when we look into the contribution of I.P. Desai to sociology of India, he looks into all these issues of caste, reservation, untouchability, family, and tries to understand or give us a kind of a sociological understanding of the way in which social change was affecting the institutions of family, caste and village. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.